Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you for holding on for a little bit and for our conversation here tonight about jazz education, the importance of it, how it keeps the jazz scene in this town and elsewhere vital. It's just great to have you here. Steve, do you want to say anything before we get started? Yeah, here's Steve. Yeah.
Let me fight the mic a bit here. Just wanted to thank everybody for being here. Steve will introduce everybody on the panel, but especially wanted to make sure and mention the Neighborhood Tourism Development Fund, who helps fund these events. And without further ado, thank you for being here.
Well, again, I'm Steve Kraske of KCUR's Up to Date, and I teach at UMKC journalism program there, not too far from where Carl does his thing. But let me introduce our panel here because it's a distinguished one. Carl Allen on my far left, a William D. and Mary Grant, Missouri endowed professor. I would love to be an endowed professor of jazz studies at UMKC. In the middle, it's Clarence Smith, a musician, instructor of music at Metropolitan Community College-Penn. Again here, Kansas City, obviously the home of important people, Count Basie, Charlie Parker. And I'm wondering how your programs manage to honor that tradition along with, keeping the current scene vibrant and heading off into new musical directions. How do you balance history with something new and fresh, Carl?
That's a loaded question. First of all, just
no, it's a fair question. It's a basic journalistic question, Carl.
Okay.
I'm not asking for commentary on the question. I want you to answer the question. Yeah.
So you're not running for office, huh? No. Well, for me at UMKC, for instance, I'm teaching jazz history, and so of course we've gone through a lot of the musicians from here. The challenge, just that we're dealing with, generationally speaking, is that some of these kids feel so far removed and so disconnected from the history. Mm. You try to find a way to make it relevant to meet them where they are.
How do you make it relevant?
That's an interesting question, too. Well, for instance, we can take people from here and then we could look at their music and then give examples of how other people have recorded their music just to show that this music doesn't have an expiration date. And because for them, a lot of the younger musicians, it's almost like people who come to hear the music, they see this as a museum art form, right? If you're only playing music, because I've heard people say, do you guys only play music by dead people? So trying to make it such that, and presenting it in such a way where you still keep the integrity of what the music is about, but try to find a way to make it relevant for their world. And that's an ongoing challenge.
Does it connect with them at all that Charlie Parker failed here and he succeeded here? He did all of it here. Does that impact them?
No. The thing that many of us, the people that we look at and we marvel at, completely goes over their head. I'll give you an example. Even outside of just Kansas City musicians. In my jazz history course last fall, I'm talking about gospel and blues and R&B and how a lot of jazz musicians started in the church, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, I mentioned Mahalia Jackson. They didn't know Mahalia Jackson. I mentioned Aretha Franklin. They didn't know. I said, okay. So let me try to
Clarence is shaking his head.
Someone a little bit, maybe they can identify with. So I said, okay. Like John Legend, he started singing jazz and gospel. Jennifer Hudson, she's got a TV show. She started singing gospel. They didn't know who they were. Yeah. And so I said, well, who do you guys listen to? It really is a thing. So, but to go back to your question, how do we try to find a way to make that connection? For some of these kids, just this year, when we went to the Gen Conference, a number of our students went in New Orleans, and they got a chance to hear a lot of musicians. And of course, I bring in a lot of guest artists. And my thing is I'm gonna stay on message. I'm not gonna water it down. This is the level, you need to come up to it, this is what it is. And so for some of them going to New Orleans and seeing so much music in such a short period of time, they had an aha moment. And then over spring break, one of our students and a couple of alumni went to New York. For instance, our grad assistant, Andrew Vogesser, he went, and I was playing there, and he came by the gig, and I was able to connect him with Ron Carter and a couple of other people for lessons. And every time something like that happens, they say, okay, now I know what you've been talking about.
Okay.
Right, so then they start to see, okay, you say you want to do this and you want to do what these guys did. There's no shortcuts, right? You still got to come through this journey of studying this music and what all of these people have done.
I think that's a great point. And Clarence said, the notion there aren't any shortcuts. I teach students how to interview people, and everybody thinks, well, they watch Oprah do it. And I think Oprah is like, she's just amazing. But she makes it look so easy, and that's the problem. And maybe like some of the people, Carl's talking about, when students, they see it looking so easy, they don't appreciate the homework that has to go in to the prep ahead of time to talk to, Prince Andrew and his wife like Oprah did, or, Lance Armstrong when she broke all that news about his dope use. They don't see the work that goes into it, and maybe that's what's missing here.
Well, it's not but no. But I think when you see people who have mastered something, they have this ability to be able to do it in such a way where it looks easy.
Yes, right? Yes. Like you, by the way.
One of the things that I would get into, I won't say arguments because I don't argue with students, but I'm telling them I want you to aspire to be great. I said, I have not met your friend who's 22. They haven't done anything. They ain't played with nobody. And I'm telling you, they're not great. Well, how you know they're not great? You ain't heard them. I said, okay, let's talk about some great musicians. Is Elvin Jones great? Was Duke Ellington great? Was Louis Armstrong great? Was Charlie Parker? Was, Dave Brubeck? Okay,
yeah.
They're all great. Does your friend belong in the same room with them? No. And so just to get them to see what you really have to aspire to.
Right.
Otherwise, and I blame social media for part of this, we're so quick to want to be great and want to be accepted and want the accolades without doing the work.
I think that's right.
So, but
You share some of the same issues, Clarence, when you're working with students?
Definitely, but one of the things that caught my attention and I want to address is I'm at a community college and I teach a music appreciation class, and the last unit is on the roots of American popular music, and so I discuss everything from field hollers and work songs. We go as far as we can go.
Right.
And for those students, it's the first time they're hearing this information about jazz musicians. And when I was teaching in the 1980s,
That wasn't that long ago, Clarence.
I could say Louis Armstrong, or I could say then Chuck Mangione. I could say the name of 12 jazz musicians, and most of those students in that small Missouri town in the middle of nowhere could recognize who they are. And that's very different now. They have no clue.
Well, why? What's happened?
Well, if you recall, I recall as a little boy hearing The Entertainer on Top 40 radio, or
Sure.
that Fifth of Beethoven song or whatever. I don't even know. I remember hearing instrumental music in the Top 40. So I think tastes have changed for the worse. I'll admit that. And I tease my students about that. I will say just things really what you just said. I will say something about the 1970s or 80s, and I'll say, and it's better than the music that you like today. But that grabs their attention. But what I find interesting, and I can ask you a question, are the students that you were talking about, are they your jazz students?
Yes.
Are they music majors?
These are all jazz majors.
Yeah, that surprises me even more, that just by osmosis and playing in a jazz band somewhere, I would think they would be more aware than the people that just need the arts credit
No, these are all,
in a music appreciation class.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of that, I just teach a couple of classes at Penn Valley now, and I don't direct any ensembles anymore, but I do manage the Jazz Academy at the American Jazz Museum, and those are middle and high school students. And the future is good. I want to tell you that those kids are aware of Charlie Parker and Count Basie, but they come every Saturday because they love jazz, and it's a little different.
Yeah.
But it gives me hope.
John, it just strikes me that, at least in my experience, jazz is unique in the sense that the history of the music and it being passed down from generation to generation is so baked into the culture of the music, unlike maybe other art forms. Are you having the same problem? Are you in Clarence's camp or Carl's camp, or where are you here in terms of the students appreciating the history of what they're trying to achieve?
A combination of both.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're in the middle.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, a combination of both. And so I think all three of us have different ways to handle this situation. I think all educators have this situation. I think it's in classical music too. I just think it's in music education in general. And so my standpoint from this situation is that, first of all, I'm a vocal director. I'm a choral director by trade. And then I just kind of fell into doing vocal jazz. I teach both classical and jazz choir. And so I just kind of fell in this too a little bit later in my career. And one thing I try to do to kind of bridge that gap, the historical perspective is very important, but I really focus on style. And so there is such an emphasis in music education on Eurocentric music. And then there's still people today that look down upon Afrocentric music. For example, when I was coming up through college in the 90s, I was told if I sung jazz, if I sung pop, then that was bad for the voice, So, which is not true. You can sing in any style that you want as long as you have good vocal technique. And so, anyway, so what I try to do is that I look at it from the perspective of trying to teach my students stylistic contrast. At my college, all the vocal students have to do the concert choir. And then the students with the better ears, I have 3 different jazz choirs of different levels. And so the students with the better ears get the opportunity to sing in the jazz choirs. And then the jazz choirs, I really enjoy teaching jazz choirs because in the concert choirs, most of the music that we do in the concert choirs is Eurocentric music, but I really get to really focus on the Afrocentric music in the jazz choirs, and I focus on teaching different styles, not only teaching what swing is or what funk is, but what is its foundation at its minimal barrier. For example, I love teaching Stevie Wonder because it's the best example of teaching any type of pop and funk music and breaking down to what that type of music is, which is it's syncopated 16th notes with ties over the bar line in the middle of the bar. I explain it in that way, what is it at its foundation. So I like to add in historical comments about certain musicians, the most important musicians to learn.
I was going to say, do you get to Ella and Sarah Vaughan and Billie Holiday? Is that part of this or not?
Oh, we do that. But we also focus on new musicians right now. And the current musicians right now. So, one of my favorite singers right now is Michael Mayo, or Christy DeSalle, or there's a multitude of current musicians. So we also offer a vocal jazz style class that all of the vocal jazz students have to take. They not only take the ensemble classes, but they do the styles class where they learn how to build up a solo songbook, and then they learn how to communicate with instrumentalists. They learn some jazz history. And so in terms of from the vocal perspective, they learn the vintage artists, but they also learn the current artists as well, and what to deal with. So it's just, we all are dealing with the same things. It's just we all also have different perspectives of dealing with it. And so I just deal with it from trying to focus on teaching them different styles. And the last thing is, I also like to remind them that the stylistic perspective is very important. So, for example, if I have students that are interested in Earth, Wind, and Fire, people don't forget that Earth, Wind, and Fire, a lot of those musicians have a jazz background. So, I mean, if they can learn jazz, I just feel like if you can learn jazz, you can learn anything. And from a
Right.
vocal perspective, if you could sing jazz, if you could sing that harmony, that 3/7 voicing, then you could sing anything else. Everything else comes easier. A lot of people don't know, like by teaching jazz choir, I give them some pretty hard rep. And so when they get into the choral rep, they actually sight read better, and then everything locks in better in the traditional choral rep because they've been through some of the hardest material in my other ensembles. So that's my perspective.
Clarence, how, maybe stepping back for a moment, how important is jazz education? Because it's not lost on me that we were talking about Charlie Parker. You know, he didn't go to college, and Louis Armstrong didn't go to college, and Duke Ellington didn't go to college, and Miles Davis did, I think, 3 semesters at Juilliard, and that was it. So, and they seem to have pretty good careers. How important is jazz education to begin with?
Well, personally, you know, probably for all of us, it's the most important aspect of music education. Well, I certainly, I can't
agree.
Okay, thank you for that. And because it's, I mean, we've all heard the quote that, you know, jazz is America's most important contribution to the world of art. And it's that simple to me. And
But why do you need an education to learn to do it if those guys didn't get an education and they did it so
well, they
damn
got an
well?
education. They just didn't get a traditional education.
Okay.
Like taking tests.
That's
and
fair.
And
Writing,
times have changed.
writing papers. Yeah, it's just how jazz is delivered now is very different now than it was then.
I mean, the concern you have heard, and, you know, Carl, I'm not telling you that you haven't heard before, is that learning it at a college or university, in some way, it might strip away the creativity a young kid might have who might learn it on the streets and be able to succeed from there. Help me there.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. You know, as John had just mentioned, the business has changed, the scene has changed. So there is an education, to Clarence's point, that has to happen. You know, so of course, all those guys that you mentioned, there were no jazz programs, right? So the bandstand was your classroom.
That's right.
And so now I've heard someone say that the classroom, you know, is kind of like the new bandstand. And I said, there's never anything that will replace the bandstand. But the point is, we now have to bring people into the classroom for them to get those type of experiences, because one, we don't really have that apprenticeship model that we had when I was coming up. When I was coming up, you wanted to be in someone's band. Now I hear 20-year-old people talk about my band. I'm like, man, you got gigs? Nope, you don't have a band. You got some people you hanging with. That's the difference, right?
Okay.
And so, but that's how you got your stuff together, by being in someone's band. And so part of that tradition, at least in New York, when I first moved out there to go to school in Jersey, you didn't even, it was just known. You didn't even ask to sit in with anyone unless you already knew their music, right? You want to sit in with Horace Silver, you want to sit in with Art Blakey, with Clark Terry, you better know their music. Because if they say, and it was Sunday night, the third set, because everybody did 3 sets a night, Tuesday through Sunday. Sunday night, third set, that's when people can come sit in. Horace Silver's not going to say, okay, you want to sit in, what do you want to play? They're playing their book. And if you don't know the book, you will not be sitting in again. Right? And so you just knew that. And so because we wanted to be on that, in that space, we learned everybody's music. So, but this is part of another conversation that I'm so glad we're doing this, because I've been saying for years, the jazz education needs a facelift. For instance, what Clarence is doing is so important in terms of these community-based weekend programs, because many of these schools around the country have done away with their jazz program for these high school and junior high school kids. And so what I'm seeing at the college level, John, I'm not sure if you're seeing this, but fundamentally, a lot of these kids are just so far behind the 8 ball because they've not taken lessons, they've not been in band, and we can't forget the damage that the pandemic did. And that's a very real issue that we're still dealing with
Yeah.
We would deal with it for quite some time.
in quite some time.
It's a significant, it's not only in student personalities, it's in their education as well. It's in terms of their access as well. That pandemic is, I'm still dealing with it, and it's been 6 years now. Wow. So,
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And so when we talk about that, right, we have to look at, for instance, one of the things that I did with my jazz history class, I said, look, if it were up to me, it wouldn't even be a grade. It'd be pass or fail. You did it or you didn't do it, right? Because that's life, right? But I said, we have to have grades. So I gave them a choice for their midterm, for their final. How y'all want to do it? Y'all want to do a test? Y'all want to do, because I'm trying to meet them where they are. Because one of the things that I know, particularly coming out of the pandemic, everybody learns different. This was even before the pandemic, right? But there's some kids, you can give them a book, they're going to remember everything in it. Other people, you give them a book, they won't remember 2 pages.
Right.
Some, you can give them a record to listen to. They'll remember, some will remember everything, some will. Give you an example. Part of the final, really quick, I gave them, it was going to be a listening portion. It was 3 tunes. Gave them 3 weeks in advance. I gave them 30 seconds to listen to each tune, 30 seconds to write the answer. From the beginning. It's not like I dropped a needle in the middle of the track. Played the first track, played the second track. For the third track, I played the exact same track I played first. Not a different song, not a different version.
Same track.
Half of the class wrote something completely different. And I said, guys, this wasn't even 5 minutes ago. But it speaks to, unfortunately, where some of them, where they're at in terms of their ability to just focus. And if we don't deal with this, I mean, education in itself is really it's taking a hit. And this goes beyond music, because I'm seeing this outside of just music. This issue.
Well, I'm hearing the idea of going to a 2-hour movie for a lot of our students is like, you got to be kidding me. 2 hours? We don't do that, you know. But this notion that Carl just said, Clarence, about what's been lost with the lack of jazz education in this high school level, junior high school level, are you seeing that at the community college level? Are you having to work from a different starting point than you did a few years ago?
Yeah, most definitely.
That's discouraging, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. But I also see some really good things happening out there. Now, if we were at a jazz festival and critiquing bands, evaluating bands, you know, sometimes it's fun. You know, like, man, they shouldn't have ever gotten up this morning. They should have stayed home.
Right.
You know, but at the same time, there are some good things. Now, generally speaking, I think my opinion is jazz education. Let's just the state of Missouri and Kansas, because, you know, I travel to both states, and I think we're behind. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Kansas and Missouri.
Well, I also go to Iowa and Oklahoma, and they generally have stronger programs. Or a good comparison would be a lot of 2A and 3A schools in Iowa have really fine, strong, fundamentally good programs.
Very true.
And I don't see that here. I don't see that in Missouri. So
they have good
it just
programs at the
depends.
high school level you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. High school, yeah. There, you know, and around here there are good high school big bands, you know, but they're probably lacking in their improvisation. You know, that's where the biggest problem is, in my opinion.
Improvisation.
Yeah, just being able to get up and play. And so it's a mixed bag, but I do think I think jazz education is, we're kind of losing the battle.
And we're losing it, why?
I got a lot of opinions about that.
Well, you have the floor, sir.
Well, to me, it starts with okay, I'll be official. If we're talking about public schools and private schools, you have to have a district, or you have to have a building, a principal, a building leader that wants to have a good fundamental program. period. That has to happen first. But even more important than that is the guy that gets the job or the gal that gets the job. And if they don't bring knowledge and all the skills necessary to teach, whatever, musically, discipline, management, whatever, if that person has it together, it doesn't matter where they teach, they're probably going to be successful. At least that's my opinion. That's where it begins. And, parents play a role, obviously, but, 9 times out of 10, if parents see a teacher who cares and is actually providing something for their child, they'll support it.
Even if it's jazz and they don't know jazz.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well,
right.
Case in point is, parents will clap at anything. You go to a concert, and they'll applaud anything and we'll be up in that booth saying that was just. Why did you even decide to play that instrument? But parents are like, and so parents are very supportive. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard question to answer, but that's my simple response.
Yeah.
Leadership on all levels has to happen, in the schools at least.
John, what have you noticed in your experience in terms of drop-off from the high school level to even community colleges? What are you seeing along those lines?
It's not, Clarence and Carl are correct, but I'm just going to add a new perspective to it. It's not just leadership, it's the overall structure, like nationally, in terms of music education. I'll give you an example. So a few years ago at the Gen Conference in Dallas, I gave a presentation that was entitled The Misunderstanding, the Black Misunderstanding. And so the subtitle to that was the difference in education of Afrocentric music, and which means that at colleges, when music teachers are trained in college, they're required to study all of the classical level music. Not all schools have in their curriculum courses in jazz history, jazz theory, depending on their instrument, methods classes in jazz, So I think that's the foundation of it. So taking it from the vocal jazz perspective, I'll give you an example. So in that nationwide, all 50 states, if I'm just talking about like choir nationwide, all 50 states have an all-state high school choir. Only about 25 states in the country, 23 to 25 states in the country have an all-state jazz choir. Mm-hmm. And I get hired to fly out nationally to conduct all-state jazz choirs. And so it's only about half the country that really does it. And then within the last 10 years, there have been 2 states that have lost their jazz choirs because they have people within the structure that don't believe the jazz choirs have dropped off. And if you look at it at its foundation, a lot of it is because depending on what school that director has probably come from, they didn't have jazz in curriculum. So when they get a jazz ensemble at their new job, they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. It's all about structure. And then by the time you're a teacher, regardless of what you teach, you don't have how much time do you have to learn that much new stuff when you're teaching, regardless if you're K through 12 or collegiate? So that's a lot of the issue. I'll tell you some drama that's going on right now. Currently, right now, the state of New York, one of the oldest all-state jazz choirs in the country, they're considering disbanding the jazz choir and turning it into a contemporary vocal ensemble. Wow. What's contemporary vocal ensemble? That could be pop, that could be gospel, that could be jazz, that could be contemporary a cappella, whatever. And so that idea is just not going to work for a multitude of reasons. And there's actually a national Zoom meeting about that. Well, it's in the state of New York, but there's people nationally chiming in, like myself, on a Zoom meeting Sunday night to discuss this issue, to fight that issue. And they're considering that, and then the people that are in charge of the state of New York, MEA, so the reason why they're doing it, because they've seen a number drop off, but also, too, part of that, the foundation of that is that what are the teachers learning, where the teachers come from? What's their foundation in terms of their education? Did they have jazz in their curriculum at all? So the overall answer to the question is that there's a problem in structure. To get any music degree, I mean, we all have graduate degrees in music. To get any music degree within your education, you have to learn Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. But only about maybe a fourth or less in the country of people with music degrees in the country learned about Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Charlie Parker. I mean, it's a huge drop off, So, so it has to start at the education level. It has to start at the collegiate curriculum in music education, where there has to be requirements for some type of jazz courses to be offered for this to move forward.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't start at that moment, then we're going to have issues.
Yeah.
We'll continue to have issues.
But there are a couple of elephants in the room that we don't even realize is in the room right now. And part of what you touched on, at UMKC and many other schools around the country, I've seen this, where jazz is treated like,
Inferior.
I always say there's a difference between being accepted and being tolerated. And one of the reasons why I left Juilliard is because it was a jazz department in a classical institution. And this is what it feels like, right? Give you an example. Quite often, you have specifically brass instructors, woodwind instructors, just very much like the vocal thing, don't want their students participating in jazz. They tell them, oh, no, you can't play jazz, it's gonna mess up your embouchure. We've been dealing with this since this is my 5th year. We've been dealing with this.
At Juilliard.
No, I'm saying here.
This is nationwide, actually.
Yeah. This is happening.
And it's not new.
And it's not new.
No, it's decades old.
Right. So again, to your point, John, we as jazz musicians, we have to take the classical courses, but they're not required to take the jazz courses.
Exactly.
And so again, but a lot of that has to change from the top, right? And we don't see that, right? We do not see that. And that's a real issue. And as long as that continues to happen, these issues will continue to happen.
I want to go back to something Clarence said a few minutes ago, this idea that a lot of students you're getting, if I heard you right, Clarence, they're doing a lot of big band stuff, but it's the improvisational end of it that where they're really weak. And I'm just sort of shaking my head here a little bit like, but that's what jazz is. And it's so central to jazz, which brings up the question, how do you guys begin to approach the idea of teaching improvisation, which strikes me at the end of the day is so intensely personal within each person, what they bring, what they would choose to play in a solo or whatever. How do you even begin to approach the teaching of improvisation?
Wow. Help.
Yeah, I mean, right? I mean,
No. So I can only speak of my own experience, which was taking a graduate course with David Aberg at the University of Central Missouri and just being thrown into Jazz Improv 101. And there's a system. I mean, he uses a system, I taught a system, and it's rooted in just basic fundamentals of scales and chords. And I would wager that 80% of most public school kids or private school kids that are not even in jazz programs can't play all of their scales and don't know their chords. And so, but that's where it begins. And on our level, I try to tell, I tell students, well, you're not Miles Davis. You're not going to sound like Miles Davis right now. You need to go through a system. Let's learn these basic things first, and then we can give you more. The ear is involved. It's a very complicated question to answer, but it's a very, very difficult and complicated process to learn. But we have kids that do it all the time. There's a young man that was just playing drums in here a second ago that plays saxophone that went through a process. So kids can kids can learn how to. I mean, we hear fantastic soloists that are young for their level, and it's the process. And if we can, and it took me a long time to not blame myself for some kid not sounding like John Coltrane after 2 years of, but it's patient, and we have to be honest. This is a process. And when I say it's the weakest part of this weakest aspect of jazz education, it is true. But I have to keep in mind that they're kids. The expectation should be there.
Are they willing to put in the time to learn the scales that you were talking about?
Most of them, no. I mean, I'm just talking about just basic general public schools. A lot of the kids that we have in our Saturday program need to do it more, but they put in the time more than most kids because they want that. It's a little different.
And that's why they're there.
Yeah, they're committed. They pay for it. It's their Saturday. They probably rather do that than go to marching band anyway. So, but anyway, that's a loaded question.
Carol, how do you approach that whole teaching of improvisation?
Well, one of the things that I think, again, looking at the model, because I don't think the model really has changed much for the past, I don't know how many years in terms of how do you get to that next level. I think as educators, we have to be committed to lead by example, and we also have to model greatness. If we don't model greatness, we are basically telling them they can follow whoever they want and they're going to be okay, which is just not true. So, for instance, one of the challenges that I dealt with when I first got here, students didn't know any tunes. And so we established a tune list. My students were complaining, you have no idea. I don't want to learn tunes. So one of the kids was a bass player. I won't mention his name, he plays around town. And we had a year-end meeting. He's graduating. He said, well, I just don't think we should have to learn these tunes. I said, really? I said, what do you think you should do? We should be able to play our own tunes. I said, okay. So you play bass. You get a call from me or from Marcus Lewis 2-3 times a month for outside paying gigs. I said, you enjoy doing those gigs? Yeah. They pay well, right? Yeah. They don't want to hear your music. You're playing a nursing home, you're playing a corporate event, you're playing a party. They want to hear something they know. Mm-hmm. They're not interested in hearing your tune in 13/9. It's just It's just what it is. But then you say, when you learn standards, and I'm not saying it should only be standards, but when you learn standards, it's part of the fabric of this music. You can go anywhere in the world and go into some jazz club, and somebody's playing around midnight. Somebody's playing Have You Met Miss Jones, Stablemates, or what have you. So, it helps you to become. When you start to learn the language, it helps you to be able to communicate and create other types of relationships. But again, part of the challenge that we have that we're not talking about in jazz education, and part of it comes from NASM, part of it comes from accreditation because of the guidelines and so forth. You have to have a certain number of faculty with terminal degrees and this and that and the other. I can't tell you how many colleges I go to where I always look at the degrees. Now, maybe it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my head. I only have a bachelor's degree, right? I've made almost 300 records, though. But what I'm saying is I see people who basically went from a kindergarten to a DMA to running a program, haven't played with anybody. I'll leave it up to their mama to tell them they can't play. Yeah. Or I'll tell them Clarence said they can't play. But some of these, they can't play. So you can't play. How are you teaching this music? There's no other way to be able to teach it but to model it. This is not a textbook thing where you just read this book and now let's swing. It doesn't work that way.
Hey, how are you going from learning the book, learning the standards, to improvisation during the course of those standards?
Well, for instance, for us, learning these tunes, they have to play the tunes. Every week there's a different tune. You're playing them in your lessons. You're playing them in improv. You're playing them in small ensembles.
Okay.
Okay. Why? So when we have jam sessions or when we have guest artists, what we're trying to avoid is, Cyrus Chestnut saying, what tune y'all want to play? And we hear for 7 minutes. You don't need to hear You got 9 tunes you've already learned this semester. Pick one of those tunes.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And now if you go to Vine Street Brewery tonight at Marcus Lewis jam session, you got some tunes you can play. And you don't have to pull out your phone, which we don't allow. Right?
Yeah.
That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the standard all over the world, because when we start talking about what's happening with this music, it's also a cultural thing. I can go to Argentina right now and go to a jazz club, and these kids are playing. I can go to Tokyo right now, these kids are playing. I can go to, Moscow, these kids are Paris, these kids are playing. And not one of them got their phone up with the iReal book. They've learned some music. It's important to them.
Wow.
But it's always been like that in the States in terms of the arts.
As a fellow teacher, one thing I struggle with a lot is one word, which is candor. And I'm wondering how you approach something as personal, John, I'll start with you, as being candid with someone, whether they're very talented or maybe some young folks aren't. Mm-hmm. And how do you navigate that? How do you approach that? Because that seems to me to be fairly central to what each of you do.
Oh, that's easy.
Is it?
It is.
Okay.
It's very easy. People want you to be honest with them, regardless of what age they are. There's no you don't feed them propaganda. You're just, for example, as an instructor, I'm your instructor. I'm not your parent. It's not my job to nurture you. I will help you if you need help, and I'm here if you need to vent about something. But at the same time, I'm your instructor. It's not my job to nurture. It's my job to be honest with you. I will tell you when you do well. I will tell you when you don't do well, but it comes from good intention, and I'll tell you how to improve what you're not doing well. People just want honesty. And if you're honest with people, like 95% of people are fine with that. And so that's from my experience, for one. And then also, I wanted to get back to the improvisation question as well, because from the vocal perspective, it's actually quite different. It's not necessarily like the technique of the instrument, and it's technique of the instrument, but or just learning scales. The vocal perspective, it all starts with the head. It all starts with the melody. So it's more about learning the tune, and then learning the different things that you could do with that tune. Front phrasing, back phrasing, the usage of long tones, the usage of question-answer phrases, the usage of space. Everything starts from the head, because from the vocal perspective, nationally, people are scared, vocalists are scared to dive into improvisation when they first learn to it, because they have to create on the spot. And in vocal music education, as you grow up, you're not used to doing that. You're used to reading from the page. The focus vocally from K through 12 is the focus of sight reading. That is the focus, is the complete opposite of being free and creating something on your own. So from a vocal perspective, when you teach improvisation, it all starts with the head. You learn tunes, and then you learn different ways to navigate through the tunes. And by learning the tunes, you learn the form. So it's actually more about learning, because what jazz charts are at its foundation is 3 things. It's melody, form, and harmony. And so by learning the melody, and you understand the format, and then the harmony will come from learning the head. And then once you learn the head, you could kind of experiment and expand upon language at the same time.
That's
and then the other perspective that I do this in my concert choir. We sing scales. And so we sing scales on solfege, not just the major scale, but we sing a lot of chromatic scales. We practice sometimes whole tone, the 3 different minor scales, and then we've done modes before, just in choir as part of a warm-up. So just, and so it's kind of those 2 things. So it's vocal and instrumental is quite different, the way to get to it, and you just kind of figure out what works best. But that has worked for me, just starting with the melody and then expanding upon that.
Yeah.
So.
Clarence, John just said that candor is easy for him. Is it easy for you too?
Absolutely, and really for the same reasons that John spoke about. But I also think that providing or showing your passion about, you have to figure out a way to get to your students, and they're all different, and they all come with different abilities, and you have to probably approach them differently sometimes. And that's what master teachers can do that, and they can do that in a way that builds confidence and builds encouragement and excitement to perform. It doesn't always work, but that's my approach. And but I did want to add, well, not add, but just make a comment that your singing of scales and modes, that needs to be happening in the instrumental class as well, for ear training. So anyway, just want to, and the whole thing about improvisation, learning to improv based on the melody, that was pre-Charlie Parker. That was sort of the norm for instrumentalists.
Carl, somehow I think that being candid is not a problem for you either. Am I right about that?
You're right.
I knew I was.
Well, but there's, I should probably have a trophy in tough love. But the thing is, it's not about, you try to let them know that you really only want the best for them. I mean, I tell students, I want you to be the best version of yourself, right? So this is not a competition or anything, but I do think truth and honesty is really, really important. Rufus Reed was my teacher in college, and I still call him my teacher. And one of the things that he was always just really honest. And if it wasn't happening, he would have a conversation with you. And I think as educators, we owe them that. Because now imagine you've graduated, you've gone for 4 years or 2 years or whatever, and no one ever told you all of these really basic things, from showing up on time, being dressed appropriately, to playing in tune, whatever the case might be. And now you get out and somebody's like, hey, man, you know.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that,
Sure.
too? The big thing after the pandemic is the way students treat each other and how they treat other people. There is much more of an issue of that, of how people treat each other after the pandemic.
How so? Elaborate on that a little bit.
People are, how do you explain it? I don't know, people are just kind of, for a variety of reasons that I don't want to elaborate on, but people are just a little bit more hateful to each other.
Oh, interesting.
It's not the content sometimes, it's the way it's presented. And then students after the pandemic, it's like they never learned how to present information or communicate to people in a correct manner or in a professional manner. So that's on top of that. So,
But
yeah.
And I think the pandemic was part of the cause of that.
Yeah,
Because
that's what
of
I'm
the,
saying.
because of the
I agree,
isolation and developing critical thinking skills and
Correct.
empathy and all those things.
Yeah,
I
right.
agree with that. I
It's
think
the
that's a
way
big
the
part of it.
presentation of that information, and it's just I've discovered a little bit more conflict with students, so it's more exhausting as an educator to try to make everything work a little bit, because students are more sensitive, they lack grit, and then they have trouble presenting information that they want to communicate. So so there's that too. So that's an issue.
You see that with your colleagues? You experience that with your college students?
I've seen it. I clinic a lot of high schools throughout the year.
Yeah.
So I've seen it at the high school level, but I've also
Right.
seen it at the college level as
I
well.
see.
And so I even have to do a lot of work. It's like, hey, you want to do this professionally, regardless of what job you do, whether it's in music or not in music, you have to learn how to deal with people. And then it's like a lot of it is just treating people right. Because over my whole career, probably half my gigs is because I knew somebody. At
Yeah.
least. Yeah. And then, so if you
Yeah.
make enemies when you're in college, you're defeating half your career right there. So
But that's a heavy load on a faculty member to teach people how to treat other people. I mean, you don't do that overnight. That takes some time, doesn't it?
well, it's just being honest with them. That's
Yeah.
what they pay to go to school for.
Yeah.
Is to be honest. It's not just about, if you really want to be successful in this career, it's just not about musical content that you learn. You have to learn you have to teach them like how to act in a professional manner, and that's a major part of that.
Yeah.
That's a major part of this job, you know. And so with all of us too, you know, to do the actual music is only like 30% of the job. The other 70% is like dealing with people and dealing with paperwork and coordinating and organizing. So I mean, yeah, that's what it is. So aren't we supposed to prepare them for what's coming up next?
Yeah.
And be honest about that. And if they mess up, tell them that they're messing up. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think another part of it, at least for me, I'm seeing more and more kids come into college where they're the only musicians in their family. You know, when I was coming up, you know, most kids came from a family of musicians, right?
that was me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because of that, it's difficult for some of them because they don't have the structure at home where the parents really understand.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that their whole sense of community comes from within the music program or the jazz department. And sometimes, you know, you find that they rely on you individually more so as like their mentor, you know, because they can't really go home and talk to their parents about what they're experiencing in school because, not to say the parents don't care, they just don't have an understanding of that culture, you know?
Yeah.
That is correct.
I just want to ask one more, then I'll open it up to you guys here. But this notion that one of you referred to teaching students for where they're at and how every student's at a different place. You know, Clarence, how do you do that? How do you approach that part of it if you have 20 students and they're all in different places?
Well, some things you have to teach everybody, and
Yeah,
they're either going to get it or they're not going to get it at that moment. Let's say in a rehearsal, but then there are lessons, and then you stay after. I'll work with you on this. You know, go home and practice that. You know, I feel like I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve, and they're just general education kinds of things. You know, this is your responsibility to do this. You know, for some students, you could say, you know, you're not going to get I've not taught high school in years, but you're not going to get a letter. You're going to get a poor grade. For some students, that's a great motivator. For some students, you can say your playing sucks, and that's a great motivator for, you know. It just depends, and there are just many ways, I think, to approach this, but you have to be aware enough.
You get a feel for each student as you go along in a semester, don't you?
You better.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how good or poor they are, it is your job to evaluate them and get them to where they need to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the ensemble or for their own personal.
Yeah.
So.
Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. What questions? Yeah.
First of all, thank you. I'm a son. My father was a musician and taught in bands for years, so it's almost a little bit of nostalgia here, you guys. So thanks for that. Can you talk a little bit about? I think technology is a double-edged sword. When I grew up, if you wanted to learn how to play a song, you drove your parents nuts, rewinding it. Now with YouTube, you can keep the pitch, you can slow it down to halftime. It's like a whole different animal, and I think the ear is what suffers from that because the kids have that instant gratification that they can figure it out, but they didn't develop their ear to figure it out. Do you guys see that too?
I think to answer that question, as educators, it's important for them to offer assignments to train their ear, and it's important for them to offer assignments in terms of reading. And I think it's a mix of both. So for example, from a vocal perspective, one of the best choirs in the country, one of the best professional choirs in the country is the Jason Max Fernandez Singers. It's an all-black professional choir now that was based out of Alabama, and then now they're based out of Maryland. A little side note, he was the choir director of the Aeolians, the school where Take Six went to. Yeah, and so, so he comes from that tradition of doing both reading and doing stuff by rote. And then maybe a few years ago, and this is a professional choir, a few years ago, the artist Jake Collier worked with that group for SNL. They did a performance on SNL, and Jacob Collier taught the choir by rote up to the performance. They were still changing notes 20 minutes before the performance. And so the point is that there are, of course, professional settings where you have to learn how to read, obviously, and read well, but there's also professional settings where you have to be able to catch things by ear. So it's our job as educators to try to kind of expose them to both things in terms of curriculum for them to be successful. So if it's just one or the other, then if you only just do one or the other, then it's harder to make it in this business, I feel like. So I think technology is a great thing, but sometimes for certain charts, I will give students like part files, but also too, during rehearsal, I talk about theory. Oh, tune this interval. This is the thing that you have to tune. This is what you're listening for, things of that nature. And so it's just trying to mix up the reading with the ear training as well. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
Well, my response to that is, I hear, my teachers at the academy and, teachers in general talking to their bands, and they'll say, there are 500,000 versions of 4 by Miles Davis. And while I'm still like in awe of what technology does for us, the students aren't even hearing that. I don't think they embrace it the same way that, well, at least someone my age does. Like, this is fantastic. You have all this music at your fingertips 24 hours a day. It's not a record. Like you were saying, you don't have to pick up the needle and put it back and do it a 1,000 different times. But they just don't have the same, they're not in awe of technology, I think, the way that my generation is. But I think some of the, I think it's very valuable. And I do think kids use it. But I mean, I will say, I would have died to have something like this when I was in high school or when I was in college. But it's just, it's different. Their understanding of technology is a lot more advanced, probably, than mine.
Yeah.
But it's there, and I think it's a very useful tool.
But if we allow it to be a crutch, it's a problem.
You're talking about the real beat book. If they're staring at that, they're not really in the moment.
No, I mean, and the thing is, again, this is where experience comes in, where you ask yourself, what is it that they need to do when they get to the bandstand, right? So one can agree or disagree, but when we do small ensemble concerts at UMKC, there's no music allowed on the bandstand. You have to have it memorized, right? And there's many of reasons for that. But one great example, last week we had Cyrus Chestnut. These groups, some of these students, they had half an hour to rehearse with them. And I told them in advance, you better learn their music, because when Cyrus comes, it's going to be different. Because he's changing stuff on the spot, like Ahmed Jamal. He might put up 2 fingers, and now we're going here, and it's going to be different from when you rehearsed on your own, right? But when we start talking about technology, I love technology, but sometimes it can be a crutch. And yesterday we had our juries. I had a moment. I was a little upset because all the students have to do a transcription. And one kid does a transcription at 75% of the speed. And I'm like, how is this possible? After the kid left the room, I'm asking his instructor. Well, he couldn't play it up to speed. Well, 6 trillion other songs he could have learned. Play it at the tempo that is recorded. Can't play it at that tempo, find another tune. It's not like we're saying you have to learn this song, right? So, but my point is that now that student thinks that that's okay for performance. That's not okay. That's cool for practice, right? But I think about, when we talk about technology, I think that the way we hear music greatly influences the way we play. And so one part of the challenge, because there's so much music available, was one of the reasons why the kids are not so excited as we are, because it wasn't as accessible. But if we think about kids' listening habits, the way that they listen, many of them have never listened to a record all the way through.
Yeah.
I ask students when I do clinics, tell me the last record you listened to all the way through. And they talking about, oh, you mean a song? No, the whole record. 99.72%.
They listen to records?
Well, not, and then, no. And so, but then you hear it reflected in their playing. Because the way they listen is they'll listen to a part, and they skip to the cool part, then they'll go to the third track from the second track, then they're gonna skip to the ninth track, then they're gonna go to this solo. And so now they're trying to replicate that when they play, right? So when we talk about technology, I mean, it can be a great tool, but
Yeah.
But at the foundation, communication is everything.
yeah.
And then how do you communicate to the student that this is good, this is not good? And that's the foundation.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it goes back to that.
Yeah.
That guy in front.
Yep.
Well, they say when communication breaks down, abnormality sets in,
Yeah, yeah,
so.
yeah.
The opening comment topic was on students coming into programs. I believe it was Carl mentioned how many of the students, they don't know the Giants, they don't know Duke or Lewis or whatever. What brings them to jazz? If they,
I still don't have an answer for that. But my concern, my concern is, I'm not saying you have to know any of these people.
no,
Where my concern is, for some of the students, I have not been able to identify where their passion is. I'm saying, okay, you don't know Giant Steps, cool. Name me one record you love, any genre. Okay, now you say you love it, tell me the tunes on the record. Tell me who's on the record. Let me hear you sing a couple of the solos. Not possible.
well, classical music, I mean, it's Bach or Beethoven or whatever, but if you're gonna, as a student, I wanna get into, I wanna learn jazz, well, you gotta have.
Yeah, but you got to be passionate about it, right?
Yeah.
So even if you don't like the traditional standards, I'm just saying, just something.
So it's,
Yeah.
Marcellus or maybe whatever, somebody more current.
I think the answer to that question too is that if students don't know what they're interested, like what they're passionate in, sometimes you can inspire them by like showing them somebody, showing them an artist that a lot of them are passionate about. I think that's very possible as well. So for example, I mean, like I showed my students Samara Joy, and a lot of them got really into more in jazz just because of that.
There you
And
go.
so I think a lot of it is just that, okay, if they don't know something, there is a way to get them involved. If you could keep trying to find ways to connect with them by exposing something to them, and then they start going. And then they can go from there. So
And I think the great thing about that, because Samara's closer to their age.
right,
Yeah.
And they feel
relate.
Yeah,
they relate.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think,
One more. Anybody? Well, let's do this. Let's say thank you to John, Clarence, and Carl for a great conversation tonight. This is terrific. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much. Yeah, just great, guys.
You were going to say something.
oh, I was just gonna